So we have the CGP Gray video called "You Would Be a Terrible Leader."
Do you want to rule? Do you see the problems in your country and know how to fix them? If only you had the power to do so. Well, you've come to the right place. But before we begin this lesson in political power, ask yourself, why don't rulers see as clearly as you, instead acting in such selfish, self-destructive, short-sighted ways? Are they stupid, these most powerful people in the world, or is it something else? The throne looks omnipotent from afar, but it is not as it seems. Take the throne to act, and the throne acts upon you. Accept that, or turn back now before we discuss the rules for rulers. No matter how bright the rays of any sun king, no man rules alone. A king can't build roads alone, can't enforce laws alone.
This is actually a good video to describe how why politics is the way it is, and why a dictatorship isn't actually what the caricature of a dictatorship is, one guy making all the decisions. It's also a good explanation for why Donald Trump was kind of a failure as a president, both terms. This is kind of like a good explanation for why, being the guy in charge doesn't really mean you're necessarily all that in charge.
Alone can't defend the nation or himself alone. The power of a king is not to act, but to get others to act on his behalf, using the treasure in his vaults. A king needs an army and someone to run it, treasure and someone to collect it, law and someone to enforce it. The individuals needed to make the necessary things happen are the king's keys to power. All the changes you wish to make are but thoughts in your head if the keys will not follow your commands. In a dictatorship where might makes right, the number of keys to power is small, perhaps only a dozen generals, bureaucrats, and regional leaders. Sway them to your side and the power to rule is yours, but never forget, displease them and they will replace you. Now, all countries lie on a spectrum from those where the ruler needs few key supporters to those where the ruler needs many. This foundation of power is why countries are different, yet many keys or few, the rules are the same. First, get the key supporters on your side. With them, you have the power to act. You have everything. Without them, you have nothing. Now, in order to keep those keys to power, you must, second, control the treasure. You must make sure your treasure is raised and distributed to you for all your hard work and to the keys needed to keep your position. This is your true work as a ruler, figuring out how best to raise and distribute resources so as not to topple the house of cards upon which your throne sits. Now, you, aspiring benevolent dictator, may want to help your citizens, but your control of the treasure is what attracts rivals, so you must keep those keys loyal. But there's only so much treasure in your vaults, so much wealth your kingdom produces, so beware. Every bit of treasure spent on citizens is treasure not spent on loyalty. Thus, doing the right thing, spending the wealth of the nation on the citizens of the nation, hands a tool of power acquisition to your rivals. Treasure.
Yeah, I don't really know how, because here, this is how you kind of subvert this, right? Because this is how coup d'etats happen, right? The leader is not spending enough on the military. The leader's spending maybe too much on social programs or something like that. Maybe the leader is sort of selfishly keeping the money for something else. Whatever he's doing. The military says, well, I'm the top guy. I'm the top general of the military. So everyone in the military will do what I tell them to do. And I could just take the top guy's job. I could just take the dictator's job, because if I say you're out, and my soldiers are loyal to me instead of the dictator, then I become the new dictator and we just kill the other guy, right? I think the way that you would prevent this from happening is basically using stability. So if you can use the money to generate economic stability, that means you need, the military has less need to act, right? Because if your country sucks and you're just like a soldier and the general says, "Hey, we're going to go kill the leader. We're going to go kill the president and then I'm going to become the president and then everything's going to be awesome." And everybody's poor and retarded now. So, when I'm in charge, it's going to be awesome. Then all of the soldiers are like, "Yeah, let's go kill the president." And then they kill the president, and then the general becomes the new president. And then, everything's awesome. Or the general, kills the president so that a predetermined successor can take charge and give the general more money. Something like this. But yeah, if you just create like a stable country, like the US is very stable. Like it seems almost like an impossibility that the United States government would collapse in on itself. Like it seems like it's almost impossible. Like I don't see a foreseeable future where the military deposes the president and then like one of the top generals takes charge. Like I don't even see that as a possibility. Hypothetically, I guess it could be, but I think that's how you avoid that.
Poured into roads and universities and hospitals is treasure a rival can promise to key supporters if only they switch sides. Benevolent dictators can spend their take on the citizens, but the keys must get their rewards, for even if you have gathered the most loyal, angelic supporters, they have the same problem as you, just
Right, because these people don't necessarily just value money, they would also value stability, right? So if you can promise these people stability, that can help offset maybe the promises of a rival of like giving them more money. Because having more money but less stability isn't actually necessarily more wealth for you. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Also, it works better in like a Catholic society where, people are good and not evil, right? Cause like in a society where of like pagans, you're kind of just gonna have like constant infighting and like degeneracy and sort of like this like need for infinite money and consumption. So you're gonna kind of live in like a hellscape. But like a Catholic dictatorship is going to be much more stable. Cause there's like a moral framework behind, like not being obsessed with money. There's also a moral framework in the sense of duty, like duty of the dictator or monarch to the subjects, and also the duty of the subjects to be loyal to the monarch or dictator. So that helps like stabilize things a lot.
one level down. Being a key to power is a position of power. They too must watch out for rivals from below or above. Thus, the treasure they get must also be spent to maintain their position. The loyal and dim may stay by your side no matter what, but smart key supporters will always watch the balance of power, ready to change allegiance if you look to be the loser in a shifting web of alliances. In countries where the keys are few, the rewards are great, and when violence rules, the most ruthless are attracted, and angels that build good works will lose to devils that don't. So buy all the loyalty you can, because loyalty in dictatorial organizations of all kinds is everything. For the ruler, anyway. Thus, the dictatorship exposed, a king who needs his court to raise the treasure to keep the court loyal and keep raising the treasure. This is the self-sustaining core of power. All outside is secondary. Now, a king
So the other thing about this like structure is like this is just like naked power. You also have to build in like an ethos. You have to build in sort of like an ideological structure. Like the way the United States functions is there's sort of like it's not just like a cult of the president. There's a whole like theory, there's a whole like ideology behind like being the United States. And there's sort of like a veneration of like concepts and things, right? So that kind of like abstracts it from like the people. The people are loyal to, an idea instead of maybe just a person. Because if you just have naked loyalty to a person, people are very fickle. And so if someone else comes along they could just easily be swayed to be loyal to some other guy, because that's just how it works. But if you create institutions, right, that people can be loyal to, institutions are kind of faceless for the most part, right? So if you can get people loyal to an institution like the monarchy or, the constitution, like constitutional governance, like the Supreme Court, the Congress, right? If you can like get the people to be loyal to institutions, that sort of guards your claim, right, over, their loyalty because they're loyal to the thing that you're the head of, right? So there's like partial loyalty to you, like how the president has loyalty from the people, but the people are also loyal to like the office of the presidency. So if you like you want to like distribute, your claims. If you just stack everything in like how much money you control, and you're just basically buying loyalty and that's it, like that's going to be very feeble. You need to distribute your worth. You want to have like having, I don't know, multiple revenue streams or something. It's like you want to have like people have to have a lot of reasons to support you. If they just have one reason to support you, well, maybe someone else has 2 reasons or 3 reasons. So maybe your one reason's good, but the other guy's 3 or 4 reasons are better. So then their loyalty turns. But if you say like, you'll be prosperous, you'll have social security, as in like, socially stable conditions, low crime. There's also sort of like governmental stability, so you don't have to worry about like the government having, acting erratically, right? If you can give people in power and also not in power the sort of like overwhelming reason to support you and your institution that you're sort of like embedded into, this is how you prevent rivals from rising up. Right. And that's sort of like the problem that he's showing here is if it's just like a naked use of power, that really only works until someone that's maybe a little more cunning than you or more dishonest comes around and decides that he's going to be in charge now.
Sustaining core of power. All outside is secondary. Now, a king with many key supporters has real problems. Not just their expense, but also their competing needs and rivalries are difficult to balance. The more complicated the social and financial web between them all, the more able a rival is to sway a critical mass. The more key supporters a ruler has on average, the shorter their reign. Which brings us to the third rule for rulers: minimize key supporters. If a key in your court becomes unnecessary, his skills no longer required, you must kick him out. After a successful coup, the new dictator will purge some of those who helped him come to power while working with the underlings of the previous dictator, which from the outside seems a terrible idea. Why abandon your fellow revolutionaries? Are the old dictator's supporters not a danger? But the keys necessary to gain power are not the same as those needed to keep it. Having someone on the payroll who was vital in the past but useless now is the same as spending money on the citizens. Treasure wasted on the irrelevant. And by definition, a dictator that pulls off a coup has promised greater treasure to those switching sides. The size of the vault has not changed, so the treasure must be split among fewer. A dictator that sways the right keys, takes control of the treasure, cuts unnecessary spending, kills unnecessary keys, will have a long and successful career. Seeing the structure unveiled, you might be excited to get started and control a country to the benefit of you and your cronies, or you might be exhausted, wishing to do good but seeing the structural difficulties. Now turn to democracy for salvation. So
And now this is gonna be like the fucking Reddit bullshit, time. Here's why dictatorships are awesome, and he's gonna be like dictatorships. Look, dictatorships are bad because it's about money and greed, and it makes everyone poor all the time. But here's where we talk about democracy and how freaking awesome and wholesome chungus it is. This is where the Reddit comes from. This is where we get r/I freaking love democracy.
let us discuss rulers as representatives.
Yo, chat, I'm looking for cronies. Yeah, we're building a cadre of cronies. We're gonna make a country in South America where I'm the president.
You again might have grand dreams of the utopia you wish to build, but
Or yeah, well, actually, it's in South America, so I would be like a La Presidenta. True.
no man rules alone, and never more so than in democracy. Presidents and prime ministers must negotiate with their senates and parliaments and vice versa, and they all have their own key supporters to manage. In a well-designed democracy, power is fractured among many and is taken not with force, but with words, meaning you must get thousands or millions of citizens to, if not like you on election day, at least like you better than the alternative. With so many voters and such fractured power, it's impossible to, as a dictator would, follow these rules and buy loyalty. Or is it? Of course not. Don't think of citizens as individuals with their
Wait, don't think he's gonna be like a Reddit retard about it.
individual desires, but instead as divided into blocks. The elderly or homeowners or business owners or the poor. Blocks you can reward as a group. Democracies have wildly complicated tax codes and laws, not as accident, but as reward for the blocks that get and keep the ruling representatives in power. Farming subsidies, for example, have nothing to do with the food a nation needs, but entirely with how key the vote of the farming bloc is. Countries where farmers' votes don't swing elections don't have farming subsidies. If a bloc doesn't vote, such as younger citizens, then no need to divert rewards their way. Even if large in number, they are irrelevant to gaining power. Which is good news for you. One less block to sway, and the treasure you give your key blocks has
This is very important, okay, especially right now. This is how primary upsets happen, right? You have traditional non-voting groups like young individuals, right? Young people are not voting very much. Boomers are voting a lot, and like I don't know, other people are voting a lot. But how do you do like a primary upset, right? Primary elections, very few people vote in. General elections, not a lot of people vote in, but primary elections, even fewer people vote in, right? And so your traditional guy is gonna make his promises to old people and blah 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 and whatever, right? In the primary, and a few of these people will vote. But if you, as the challenger, you're you're going up against an incumbent or it's an open primary. Um, if you can appeal, and this is kind of what Trump did, if you can appeal to traditionally non-voting demographics in a primary, it's way easier to steal the primary seat for the election. Um, if you can say get young people to if you can increase the young vote by like 500%, right? Which is a lot, but I mean, not very many young people vote. So, I don't know how the numbers would work out, but this is the fishback strategy, right? The fishback strategy is to activate this demographic in the primary to hopefully swing the primary election away from these people, right? Because some percentage of this is the old demographic. Some percentage of these people are going to be voting for fishback, right? But not very many. The old people are probably in large part going to vote for Byron Donalds. But if you take whatever percentage you can scrape out of this demographic, and then you can activate this demographic over here and combine their support to push you through the primary, that's the theory behind how James Fishback is trying to win the Florida election. How do you do that? Being an anti-Zionist. How do you activate young voters, young, maybe even liberal voters, normally Democrat voters? Well, you tell them the Democrat is never going to win the Florida governor, but if you vote for me, I'll be kind of like a liberal Republican. I'll be like, I'll be an economic centrist, and I'm anti-Zionist, right? So if you switch your party affiliation to Republican, you can vote for me, and voting for me is bad for Byron Donalds, who is a Zionist, right? So that's so. Fishbag is not only trying to activate the younger demographic, he's also trying to activate the Democrat demographic to vote for him against Byron Donalds, which is sort of like an interesting play. I've had that idea of trying to, like, activate people to vote for, outsider Democrats who are like more moderate, right, on social issues. Do you try and do like upsets in Democratic primaries? The only problem is Democrats are way more locked down. So it's a lot harder to have like an outsider Democrat, do a primary upset than for Republicans, which is why Trump ran as a Republican. Like, Trump is not a Republican. Trump just basically said, that's like the Republican Party is much less organized. It's a lot more fluid, and Republican voters are a lot more easy to sway. So he ran as a Republican, right? So this is like an important piece of the puzzle for how you take power under a Democratic and like Republican form of government.
Has to come from somewhere. If you want long years in office, Rule 3 is your friend in a democracy just as much as a dictatorship. You can't eliminate those who don't vote for you, but there is still much you can do. Once in power, make it easier for your key blocks to vote, and
this is the Democrat strategy, what Democrats are really good at. This is vote harvesting. This is vote harvesting. Right here, this is what he's describing.
harder for others. Establish voting systems
And this,
easier
right,
for your key blocks to vote, and harder
right, and this is like reading tests, back when they were trying to get Black people not to vote, they would administer literacy tests. What is the point of the literacy test? Well, Blacks were illiterate. So if you make a literacy test to vote, Blacks can't vote, right?
for others. Establish voting systems that reduce the number of blocks you need to win, the more rivals you get. Very handy indeed. Draw election borders to predetermine the results for you or your cronies. and
Gerrymandering.
Have party pre-elections with Byzantine rules to determine who blocks even can vote for. Mix and match the above for even
And okay,
and
this
who blocks
is the two-party system, right? So this is how the two-party system sort of like stays in power. You have the two parties, they're visibly opposite, right? The Republicans are sort of the opposite of the Democrats, basically, right? So what happens is there's like this sense of, well, you have to vote for one or the other, or the worst one will win, right? Plus, because there's only two parties, then who is even able to run as a candidate is kind of controlled by the party. So that's why, like, outsider candidates like Trump, that's why no one thought Trump would win, because he's an outsider candidate. And, like, the traditional thought is that if the party doesn't back you, like they didn't back Trump, then you won't win. Trump was kind of an anomaly because he did win, which is sort of unusual. But this is sort of how the two-party system prevents outsiders, who might not be partisan at all, from attaining power.
can vote for. Mix and match the above for even better power perpetuation.
And these are like running spoiler candidates. I believe he's over here. I think what he's talking about is running spoiler candidates, right? So if you can split your opposition's vote between, two different people, right? Maybe you try to split Republicans into Republicans and Libertarians, or you try to split Democrats into Democrats and I don't know, like Democratic Socialists or whatever. Vote for the Green Party or something. I don't even know. That's sort of like the theory here. If you can consolidate your support while fracturing support for your opposition into multiple parties, that's how you can maintain power. You can also do this via, we don't have coalitions because we have two parties, but you can do this via a coalition where you and someone else, your two parties say, we'll team up and our coalition will be big and everyone else will be small. And then we win. We get to select the prime minister, right? Now, they'll also do, coalitions, and then you can kind of like pass minor individuals from coalition to coalition, right? Depending on what balance of power, they are more interested in, right? So it's a more fluid system than having like the two-party system. But the two-party system also does have the caucuses, right? Caucuses are kind of like the caucus system is kind of like coalition system where you have, like remember the Freedom Caucus thing back when they were trying to replace the Speaker of the House? The Freedom Caucus says we refuse to vote. We refuse to vote to put whatever his name at the time was. We refuse to vote for him. Therefore, you do not have the votes necessary, right? That's like the caucus system is sort of having like, instead of multiple parties going into coalitions, the party contains caucuses of different, interest groups.
When approval ratings couldn't be lower, yet re-election rates couldn't be higher, you'll know you've succeeded. Now, enough with thinking about the citizens. Even in a democracy, there still are very influential individual key supporters you need on your side, because their money or influence or favors keeps you in power. While you can't just promise to give them treasure directly as a dictator would, you can create loopholes for their investments, pass laws that they've written, or print get-out-of-jail-free cards for their actions. Not a wheelbarrow of gold to the door, but contracts for their business. You as a ruler do have roads to build, or computers to maintain, or buildings to reconstruct. No man rules alone, after all. Or you could take the moral path and ignore the big keys, but you'll fight against those who didn't. Good luck with that. Corruption is not some kind of petty crime, but rather a tool.
This is also why Catholicism is potentially a very strong tool in United States politics, because now you don't even have like this internal loyalty to like some passing thing, right? You have large swaths of the population who are loyal to this sort of eternal sort of like far off institution where, like you can exploit the Catholic vote, especially because there's a lot of Hispanics. If you could get sort of like a Catholic revival among Hispanics might actually be a viable voting bloc to use for sort of like our ideological ends. Because I'm Catholic, right? So I'm in favor of integral form of government, where the government operates according to Catholic principles. So, if you can, like, perhaps sort of like do something socially to sort of like reinvigorate the Catholicity of Hispanics, you could leverage sort of like you could leverage a coalition between sort of like white identitarians who are Catholic and support like a stronger form of government with maybe like a more moderate economic policy and a stronger social policy, and Hispanics who are also sort of like loyal to the church and have their own interests and blah, blah, blah. You could, in theory, use like the Catholic religion as sort of like the bridge to bring together these two very different voting blocks to meet sort of like in the middle and sort of like give both of them their own interests and potentially gain power as an outsider. Like unironically, like Castizo futurism, but without the race mixing part. Because you could still treat them as different demographics. Like you could say, like I'm like a pro-white identitarian, but I also understand that there's a large Hispanic population that unfortunately we're probably not going to get rid of entirely. Maybe we can get rid of some of them, but to some degree, you would kind of collapse the country if you deported literally every non-white person. Like the country would kind of implode on itself. It's not economically viable to remove, be like unironically an ethno-nationalist that says we're going to deport everybody. But there's like concessions you could give to Hispanics because they're a large portion of the population. And there's concessions you can give to white people And these aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. And so using like the Catholic angle, the ethno-nationalist angle, sort of like identitarian angle, as Hispanics and as white people. There's like a lot of like scheming you can do to achieve power. And I think in the future, Catholicism and not really Orthodoxy because it's an irrelevant religion in the US. It's like less than 1%. And Islam is also 1.5%. And I think that's sort of like the way to victory is with sort of like a Catholic overtaking of the US.
Of power in democracies and dictatorships. But more on that another time. So accept the favors, sway the key blocks, and you will get into power, ruling with actions that look contradictory and stupid to those who don't understand the game, privately helping a powerful industry you publicly denounced, or passing laws that hurt a bloc that voted for you. But your job isn't to have a consistent, understandable ruling policy, but to balance the interests of your keys to power, big and small. That is how you stay in office. Now, with all this headache of being a representative, you may wonder, looking at Rule 3, why couldn't you skip all this block building, favor trading nonsense and just bribe the army to take power? We must finally turn to taxes and revolts. You must understand Rule 2 and how the treasure is raised and used to hold a country together. If we graph the tax rate of countries versus the number of key supporters the ruler needs, there's a clear relationship. More democracy, lower taxes. If you're sitting comfortably in a cushy democracy, you may scoff at this, but your fellow citizens who don't earn enough don't.
This isn't actually the case. I mean, this has to do with high trust societies, and this is like a, I mean, there is sort of a, it has to do with social trust, and it has to do with sort of like the desirability of a stable government. Typically, white countries are going to have the lowest taxes. And taxes take many forms. It's not just like we take a percentage of your income or you pay a little bit more on top of the price of a good that goes to the government. Taxes come in the form of inflation. They come in the form of, um, inflated, like the deflated value of currency. So like the devaluing of currency, but also the inflation and cost of goods. So taxes come in a lot of different ways. And high trust societies, cost less, right? It costs less to operate a high trust society because it costs, you don't have to be putting resources into buying loyalty in a high trust society. And it just so happens that high trust societies currently tend to be democratic. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, right? You could have a high trust society of sort of like a more authoritarian style. Maybe not like a traditional, dictatorship or whatever. So taxes under a dictatorship probably do look a bit higher, but there's also a lot, there's benefits to a dictatorship that, like a democratic form of government just is incapable of. So it's kind of like it's like a trade-off. It's like, better health care for cheap for more expensive versus worse health care for cheaper, pay more for less lines, pay less for more lines, stuff like that. So it's less about the form of government and more about like the character of government. That's what I kind of like found out a long time ago is the conclusion I came to is I don't like have, there's not like a form of government where it's like, yes, this is like the best form of government. Maybe in theory, but in practice, there's not really a best form of government. It's more about like the character of the government and the people that make it up. It's not like this is a democracy and so it's good and this is dictatorship so it's bad. It's like, well, this is a corrupt government made of evil people. The people ruling the country are evil. The people who are, the peasants in the country are evil. And so the country sucks. Whereas another country, like the people are morally upstanding, the leadership, are morally upstanding, they're benevolent. And you kind of use the social trust to marginalize evildoers right? Both in the streets, putting them in jail, but also in the institutions, forcing them out, like not letting them buy their way in. So that's kind of like what he's missing is he is looking at this through a materialist lens, like a material utilitarianist lens. And that's why every form of government he's talking about is seemingly dysfunctional, right? The dictatorship doesn't work because you have to spend all the money on your generals and your key supporters, and then everyone starves to death because you can't give them any money. Democracy doesn't work because you have to like buy off the special interest groups and lie to the people, right? Seemingly, both forms of government he's talked about so far are not functional. I think he's going to have a prescription for a government that does make sense. And, well, according to him, makes sense. But
don't pay income taxes and get rebates, bringing the average tax rate down. In dictatorships, this doesn't happen. Dictatorships often forego tax paperwork in favor of just taking wealth directly. It's common for the dictator to force farmers to sell their produce to him.
well, like, this is a stupid move. Like, this is a stupid move because you're not, like, it's not a good move to be the dictator and, like, oppress the people. Like, you want to keep the people happy if you're the dictator, because the happy people is less likely to try to overthrow you, right? When the opposition tries to, gather support, garner support, maybe like form a paramilitary, stuff like this. This is what happened in Weimar Germany, right? Hitler was, he was doing his thing, he was chilling, he was trying to get elected, right? The government was totally dysfunctional. All of the money was being expropriated to like the winners of World War I. Certain people were, ruining everything in Berlin. So you had this like issue where social trust was tanking, value of the currency tanking, everyone was poor. And you also had all these army people from World War I who were still alive and now out of a job because the military has been crushed, right? So what does this allow for? Well, Hitler gathers together the Freikorps, right, who are the like militiamen, former World War I soldiers. He gets them, that's his key supporters right there, the Freikorps. He organizes them into the SA and then uses them as a weapon against the other people in the society. Hitler's arrested, but the government is so sort of like in shambles that I don't know what the story is behind why they didn't just put Hitler in jail forever, but Hitler gets out, okay? And now Hitler is making all these promises. The government is totally in shambles. Everyone hates the government, right? Hitler says, I'll fix it. Then he takes power with the SA. He sort of kills the keys that he no longer needs, like what was described back here, like the Strasser brothers. I think one is killed and the other flees or something like that, right? So the Strasserists are excised from the party in the night of Long Knives. He reorganizes the SA into the SS, I believe. He, gets rid of a lot of the older Freikorps guys who weren't as good and reorganizes it into like a highly effective paramilitary. And he bans all of the opposition parties once he is elected chancellor. And then he wins. And then he, creates an economic boom. So the people are all loyal to him. So the people love him. The people in charge basically love him. People try to assassinate him. It doesn't work. They try to turn the Wehrmacht against him. It almost works, but it doesn't quite work, So that's how Hitler did it. From like a broad view, right? But if you the things he's talking about in this video, you can take them and analyze any given successful, government takeover or successful, long-running government and sort of like see like how they are applying the principles.
For little, then turn around and sell it on the open market, pocketing the difference at an unthinkably high equivalent tax rate. So taxes in democracies are low in comparison to dictatorships. But why do representatives lower their take? Well, cutting taxes is a crowd pleaser. Dictators have no need to please the crowds and thus can take a large percentage from their poor citizens to pay key supporters. But
see, like, that's not necessarily true, because the Weimar period Germany was a republic. It was a democratic republic. It had a parliament, just like all other, parliamentary states. Um, they held elections, they campaigned, but taxes were theoretically maybe low. I don't know what the tax rate, during the Weimar period was, but the effective taxes were very high because of hyperinflation, right? Inflation is just a form of taxation. It's just, instead of taking your money, they just make your money worth less, right? If the government makes the rate of inflation 5%, they're taking 5% of your money every year. If in 2025 you have $1,000, the rate of inflation is 2% per year, the government has effectively taken 2% of your money. Or somebody, maybe not even the government, somebody has taken 2% of your money by the end of the year, right? Because that is what inflation is. It's just like a tax. So typically it's a tax that goes to the wealthy or the government. And the government spends money on corporations. So it's basically, inflation is sort of like the government facilitating corporations taxing you, basically, to a certain extent. There's a legitimate use for inflation. This is why you kind of don't want to have your money in dollars. You want to have it in assets. And that's why, like, rich people aren't harmed by, inflation, because rich people, if you're poor, you can't really have investing money because all of your money's in dollars. You can't really, like, invest it because you don't have enough. You kind of need all of your money. Rich people who have billions of dollars, well, they could lose their iPhone every day and buy a new one the next day, and they wouldn't have to sell any of their assets because they just have, like, so much money, right? So, like, the capitalist class who have large amounts of money in investments, they aren't harmed by inflation because, they're helped by inflation, actually, because their assets gain value with inflation, right? This is why Elon Musk is worth $1 trillion or whatever. Is that actually true, by the way? I don't know if that's real. I heard everyone talks about it. I didn't read about it, so I don't know if he's actually worth $1 trillion, but, like, that's why inflation is not going to decrease Elon Musk's evaluation. It will only increase his evaluation. That's why you want to not have your money in money. You want to have your money in assets. If you can.
representatives in a democracy can take a smaller percentage from.
Oh yeah, and that's why. So basically, the taking of money in taxes, right? Theoretically, the rate of taxation in a democracy will be lower, but that doesn't include phantom taxes, like the prices, like inflation generally, but like the rise in the price of goods because, maybe there's a more permissive state of policing. Why do things cost more? Well, because if you have a demographic of people that steal all the time, prices at stores go up because you have to cover the cost. Like the CEO, the shareholders are not footing the bill because Jamarcus wants free J's, okay? Your ass is footing the bill for Jamarcus's free J's. So what happens? Well, all of the other J's and all of the other goods in the whole store, go up a little bit to cover Jamarcus's free J's. So that's kind of that's like a shadow taxation that you don't really think of. But if you invest more money in like military police, basically, you militarize the police and crack down really hard on criminals and problem demographics, then that maybe you spend more in taxes to fund the police, but you're also spending less on cost of goods because theft is down. See how that works? It could also be the case that they just keep the price of goods high, and then the capitalist class just pockets the the difference. That can also be the case. Or I guess the addition, they pocket the extra. I don't really know how to solve that problem. That's a very difficult problem to solve. How you like cap the sort of expropriation of wealth from the consumer class to the owning class. I don't really know how you fix that. Without just, like I said again, like one like Catholic principle is being thrifty, being a spendthrift, not wasting money. Like, the people are retarded. People are just wasting so much money. But like, basically, really the only way to fix sort of like the corporate rape of America, the rape of America by the capitalist class, is just to make people stop like wasting all their fucking money on bullshit. But like, that's very hard. You have to like have like a religious principle by which people do not waste their money. And that's like that's a part of Rerum Novarum, I believe, is that, part of Rerum Novarum is that, the owning class, the capitalist class, have a right to ownership of their property. And the working class have a right to just compensation for their labor. But there's also a concept of the working class are actually also morally obligated to spend money in like being measured about how they spend money and being thrifty in the way that they apply their money so as to not waste it, right? Because if the working class is all wasting their money, they're going to complain that the owning class aren't paying them enough, right? But really, they are being paid enough. They're all just retarded and blowing all their money all the time on dumb bullshit that they're being scammed by. So it's a very complicated thing, and that's why like I am unironically, I'm like a Catholic like utopian like thinker. Like, I believe in like the concept of, if we just made everyone Catholic and they were like faithfully Catholic, we would just live in a utopia. Straight up. Like, I believe that.
Each to pay their key supporters because their educated, freer citizens are more productive than peasants.
That's just, well, I mean, kind of true. But it's also, why are people wealthier in democracies and poorer in dictatorships? Well, if you look at where the dictatorships, South America, Africa. Where are democracies? North America, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Japan. There's there's another reason why people in democratic societies are more educated and wealthier, and people in dictatorial societies are poorer and dumber. But he's not going to put it that way, but I will put it that way.
For rulers in a democracy, the more productivity, the better, which is why they build universities and hospitals and roads and grant freedoms, not just out of the goodness of their hearts.
Also, like, freedom is, like, this is also the red pill on why the North are the good guys in the Civil War, and why Lincoln is one of the, like, maybe even top 3 presidents ever, okay? Lincoln is the GOAT. Because Lincoln wasn't, people say, like, no. Like, people say the Civil War wasn't about slavery, it was about states' rights, right? They say, like, no, we didn't want to just, it wasn't about keeping black people as slaves, it was about keeping the states free from the boot of the overreaching federal government. And to that, I agree. I agree that the Civil War was about centralizing power in the federal government over the states. I just agree with it. I just agree with the central government exerting control over the states.
But because it increases citizen productiveness, which increases treasure for the ruler and their key supporters, even when a lower percentage is taken. Democracies are...
Oh yeah, and that's another reason why Because the social trust in a democracy is kind of based on the system functioning as it does, right? Democracy, or a democratic form of government, only really works if, like, the people are happy. A dictatorship can work as long as the country is hypothetically stable. You could oppress the people all you want as long as this country is theoretically stable. But in a democracy, when you have an economic downturn, like Weimar period Germany, then there's a lot of social unrest. The government, being democratic and not dictatorial, is not as equipped to rein in, like, the sort of like locusts of power, not locus, loci of power, and that creates sort of like a grabbing effect, right? Where different groups are trying to, seize power. Uh, Under the democratic system of government, in theory, people aren't trying to grab power because the power is so distributed that it would be difficult, right? You can't just say, like, well, I'll just become the general and then I can kill the dictator and then I own everything, right? In a democracy, in like a sort of like distributed bureaucratic structure, you can't just like kill that guy, take his position, now you own everything. If you killed the president and said, I'm the president now, that wouldn't work. Even like the military, like, I don't know, you'd have to be pretty aggressive with the military, to subjugate the states, who theoretically have their own militias, the National Guard. The National Guard would theoretically be loyal to the states. I don't know if that'd be the case. That's why, like, technological control is really important for the government. That's why they want everything to be connected to the internet. That's why they want everything running on, cloud systems. That's really good for government control. If all of the National Guard military tech requires, complex military systems that are reliant on the federal government, that really reduces the amount of power that the states have militarily against the federal government.
Better places to live than dictatorships, not because representatives are better people, but because their needs happen to be aligned with a large portion of the population. The things that make citizens more productive also make their lives better. Representatives want everyone productive, so everyone gets highways. The worst dictators are those whose incentives are aligned with the fewest citizens, those who have the fewest keys to power. This explains why the worst dictatorships have something in common: gold or oil or diamonds or similar. If the wealth of a nation is mostly dug out of the ground, it's a terrible place to live, because a gold mine can run with dying slaves and still produce great treasure. Oil is harder, but luckily foreign companies can extract and refine it without any citizen involvement. With citizens outside this cycle, they can be ignored while the ruler is rewarded and the keys to power kept loyal. Thus, we live in a world where the best, smartest democracies are stable, the worst, richest dictatorships are stable.
Right. So this is like another flaw that, like, this sort of like Reddit view of how the world works is why everyone thinks the Middle Ages were like the worst thing ever. Because people believe this Reddit worldview of democracy is when everyone is rich and happy, and everything's stable, and dictatorship is when the guy in charge owns everything and subjugates the people violently, right? And that's stable, and nothing else is stable because it's bad. Well, everything else, this is like the whole of human history is in here, okay? Like, a king of a country in the, like, 14th century was not this guy. Like, this is not how kingdoms operated, okay? They were dictatorships because the king is a dictator, right? They didn't have parliamentary they didn't have like a parliamentary monarchy where the king kind of like doesn't do anything and the parliament just runs everything, right? Like is in the UK. But they were just not as like fucking evil. Like they were just not as evil basically because people had like more moral standards. But in an immoral society, you kind of have like making everyone fat and happy or making them terrified of being raped to death. Like that's really the only way you can rule sort of like immoral, degenerate people is by force or by forceful coercion or by incentive coercion. You can't really have anything else. In both of these, as he showed before, the dictatorship kind of is dysfunctional and the democracy is kind of dysfunctional. And both of them seem to be in decline. Why? Because the people are immoral.
And in between is a valley of revolution. The resource-rich dictators build roads only from their ports to their resources and from their palace to the airport, and the people stay quiet not because this is fine or even because they're scared, but because the cold truth is starving, disconnected illiterates don't make good revolutionaries. Now, a middling dictator without resources must, as mentioned before, take a large amount of wealth directly from his poor farmers and factory workers. Thus, two roads won't do, and so he must maintain some minimums of life for the citizens. But keeping the workforce somewhat connected and somewhat educated and somewhat healthy makes them more able to revolt. Now understand, the romantic image of the people storming the gates and overthrowing their dictator is mostly a fantasy. If you run a middling dictatorship, the people only storm the palace when the army lets them to remove you because you lost control
This is Antifa, by the way.
over your keys and are being replaced. This is why, after popular revolts in middling dictatorships, the new ruler is often the same as the old, if not worse. The people didn't replace the king, the court replaced the king, using the people's protest they let happen.
This is like what we're experiencing right now. This is the top-bottom squeeze, basically, kind of. It's a little bit different than the top-bottom squeeze, but this is like anarcho-tyranny. He's kind of explaining anarcho-tyranny. Anarcho-tyranny is when the ruling elite allow the lower classes to upend society and then prevent the middle classes from trying to stabilize things, right? In anarcho-tyranny, the person who steals $1,000 of stuff from the store, gets probation. You get put in jail for life if you shoot the guy who's stealing, right? That's anarcho-tyranny. And this is how you kind of like destroy a society to then put something in its place, right? Or it's one way. There's other tools besides anarcho-tyranny, but that's like one of the big ways you can do it. Right? That's what Antifa is. Antifa doesn't get in trouble when they riot, but when ethno-nationalists riot, they all go to jail, When the George Floyd riots happen and there's like over $1 billion in damage across the country, nothing happens. When people trespass in the Capitol for a few hours, they have the biggest manhunt in American history, right? The biggest investigation, like the most FBI resources ever expended. That's anarcho-tyranny. And that's kind of what they're describing here. The ruling court utilizes the masses to take out the leader. That's kind of similar in kind to anarcho-tyranny. Kind of. It's a different overall effect, but it's a similar mechanism.
To do it. The very things a benevolent dictator wants to build to cross this valley take treasure away from the keys to power and make the citizens more able to revolt, often ending in a stronger ruler, less likely to build bridges and more loyal to his keys. On the other side, the best democracies are stable, not just because the large number of keys and their competing desires makes dictatorial revolt near impossible to organize, but also because the revolt would destroy the very wealth it intended to capture, the high productivity of the citizens. Plus, those helping the would-be dictator in a democracy know he plans to cull key supporters once in power. That's what a coup is. So potential key supporters must weigh the probability of surviving the cull and getting the rewards versus the risk of being on the outside of a dictatorship they
Right, and this is the stability I was talking about an hour ago. An hour ago, at the beginning of this 18-minute video, I was talking about how it's not only about the money, it's about the stability, right? After the revolution happens, right, and you're gonna get your gold, you're gonna get your bag. Are you gonna get the bag or are you just gonna die, right? Because in the current system, everything's very stable. I'm probably not gonna get shot. In the potential system where maybe I get my bag, I also might get a bag put over my head and shot and dumped in a ditch. So that's kind of that's another thing that will keep the keys loyal to the current regime is can you pay me more, and am I less likely to be shot if I switch sides?
helped create. In a stable democracy, that's a terrible gamble. Maybe you'll be incredibly wealthy, but probably you'll be dead and have made the lives of everyone you know worse. The math says no. Being on the right side of a coup in a dictatorship means having the resources to get you and your family what the peasants lack: healthcare, education, quality of life. This is what makes the competition for power so fierce. But in a democracy,
But this is only in unstable dictatorships. There's not like a lot of examples of stable dictatorships currently. I guess Russia is close. Russia's a pretty stable dictatorship. I mean, I don't think anybody, I mean, I do think that the people generally like Putin. Are Russian elections legitimate? I'm tempted to believe they are, but they also could be rigged. It is definitely there is like definitely a rigging going on. I don't know if it's a rigging at the ballot box or if it's, back channel rigging to prevent like opposition from rising up politically. There is some amount of, trickery going on in Russia, but I don't think it's as simple as like straight up rigged elections. Like the 2020 election was like literally just rigged. I don't think it's quite, that front facing, but it probably is like behind the scenes rigged. But that's fine. Like it doesn't even matter. Yeah, like China's a good example. China is a dictatorship. What are they voting for President Xi? No. China's a dictatorship and is very stable. There's not going to be an overthrow of the government, and the standard of living of the Chinese is increasing somewhat. There's a lot of them, so it's not very fast, right? There's like supposedly over like a billion Chinese, right? I think there's supposedly over a billion Chinese. I've heard that's not true. I've heard that they inflate the numbers, but if we're going with the official numbers, I think there's over a billion Chinese. So the average standard of living increase is going to be a lot smaller. And it's also depending on where you are, right? Because the peasants are still kind of peasants. But like there's, wealth increases in other places. And sort of expansion of sort of like metropolitan areas or whatever. Like China's a good example of a stable or like dictatorial government. I guess it's more oligarchic, probably. But really, real oligarchies don't really exist. And most dictatorships are more like oligarchies than actual dictatorships.
already have these things, so why risk it? So the more the wealth of a nation comes from the productive citizens of the nation, the more the power gets spread out and the more the ruler must maintain the quality of life for those citizens. The less, the less. Now, if a stable democracy becomes very poor, or if a resource that dwarfs the productivity of the citizens is found, the odds of this gamble change and make it more possible for a small group to seize power. Because if the current quality of life is terrible, or the wealth not dependent on the citizens,
Weimar period Germany.
coups are worth the risk. When democracies fall, these are usually the reasons. These rules for rulers explain not only why some men are monsters and others are merciful, but everything about politics, from war to foreign aid to political dynasties to corruption, all of which we can talk about at another time. But for now, you, aspiring ruler, may be disgusted by the world of politics and have decided to avoid it entirely. But you cannot, for rulers come in many forms. Yes, kings, presidents, and prime ministers, but also deans, dons, mayors, chairs, chiefs. These rules apply to all and explain their actions, from the CEO of the largest global corporate conglomerate who must keep his board happy to the chair of the smallest homeowners association, managing votes and spending membership fees. You cannot escape structures of power. You can only turn a blind eye to understanding them. And if you ever want the change you dream about, there's a 0th rule you cannot ignore. Without power, you can affect nothing. You may not like these rules, but surely better you on the throne than someone else. And who knows, maybe you'll be different.
Yeah, so like here you kind of see his sort of utilitarian materialist worldview, where he says this perfectly describes everything in politics. Well, except it doesn't, because it doesn't take the moral angle. It doesn't take, it doesn't take the aspirational angle. This is basically sort of like an ascended version of Marx. He's sort of describing like a better description of like the Marxist worldview, better than the caricature of what Marx says, right? He's basically just describing materialist utilitarianism, but instead of through a communist lens, it's through sort of like a pragmatist lens, right? Not loyal to any particular ideological framework. But even then, it's just not really sufficient, which is why you have to bring in the religious angle, or the explanations don't really make sense.